Parshas Tetzaveh. This week's Parsha continues the discussion of the Mishkan. Last week's Parsha of Teruma discussed the construction of the tabernacle itself, the Mishkan itself, its structure, and the vessels that were used in the structure. This week's Parsha begins by discussing the Big Day Kahuna, the vestments that the Kohanim, the priests who served in the Mishkan, the special garments that they wore. And this is Perek Chavches, Pasuk Beis, that's 28:2, that says, Vasisa Big Day Kodesh, L'Aaron Achicha, you will make holy garments for Aaron your brother, L'Chavod U'L'Sifares, for honor and for beauty. Skipping a verse to Daled, which is verse 4, this verse itemizes the various types of vestments, of holy vestments. These are the garments that they will make. Choshen ve'Ephod u'me'il ksonis tashbeitz mitznefes vavneit. A breastplate, an ephod. What is an ephod? We'll check on that. A robe, a coat of checkerwork, a turban, and a sash. And they're made for Big Day Kodesh, L'Aaron Achicha Levanov L'chanoli. They are holy vestments for Aaron, your brother, and for his sons to serve me. So what is this ephod? Rashi doesn't explicitly formulate the question as a question, but he implicitly asks it by saying, Lo shamati, I have not heard, meaning I wasn't taught orally, v'lo matzasi b'braisa, and I haven't found in the writings of the rabbis of the Talmud, Perish Tavniso, an explanation of its construction. What is this ephod? So then he adduces several proofs to support what he describes as his intuition. He says, V'libi omerli, my heart or my mind tells me that it was tied behind him. Its width of this ephod was the width of a man's back. It's similar to a kind of apron that's called a pourcient in Old French, which ladies of rank would tie on when they would ride horseback. So, and then he cites a number of verses, and at the end he says, consequently I say, this is a translation of Rashi, that it is called ephod in reference to the apron-like garment which hung down. Okay. Now, we know from the Gmara, there's Gmara in Eruchin, there's Gmara in Zvachim, that talks about the significance of the Big Day Kahuna, that each of the vestments had a unique significance, not just a significance, but it effected some kind of kapara, of atonement. It was worn to atone for one sin or another. And the ephod, the Gemara says, was to atone for the sin of avodah zarah, of pagan worship. Now, how does that work? So the ephod, as Rashi observes, was tied behind him. And Rav Schwab says that there is a special way we treat avodah zarah, pagan worship. According to Gmara in Megillah says, Amar Rav Nachman, Kol leitzanusa asira, every mockery is prohibited. Not allowed to mock people or things. Bar mi leitzanusa davaros kachavim, the sharia. Except for the mockery, the scoffing at avodah zarah. You're allowed to mock avodah zarah, pagan worship. And then quoting a verse. This is a verse in Yeshaya 46:1. That's Mem Vav Aleph. Korah Baal Kores Nevo Hoyuatzabehem Lachaya Velabehema Nesu Osechem Amusos Maso La'ayefa. Baal bows down, Nevo stoops. Their idols are on the beasts and on the cattle. The things that you carry about are made a load, a burden to the weary beast. The Meforshim explain, the commentaries explain, that this is an allusion to people who cannot properly defecate. They can't pass their human waste. They bend down in pain, and their bellies are filled with excrement that should be excreted, but it's not. And although the actual words in the verse are put a little bit more delicately, but Rashi makes it clear that it's talking about people who can't control their bowels. And Rav Schwab says that we usually don't speak of these matters, which are coarse and crude. We don't usually describe difficulties or problems in others with defecating. it's very curious why the verse describes it this way and how the Meforshim, the commentaries, explain. And Rav Schwab says that this is unique to Avodah Zarah, this description. Why? Because he says, he analyzes what exactly are feces, what is excrement. It's what's left over from material that actually nourishes the body, and that after the body has absorbed every good and useful part of the food that it consumes, then it gets rid of the waste. It gets rid of the things that are unnecessary for continued functioning of the body. They're just garbage. And he says the Torah is filled with descriptions, we might call them anthropomorphic terminology, of the Almighty. We talk about things that relate to a physical existence, even though it is one of the principles of our faith that God does not have a physical existence. But we talk about Yad HaChazakah, his strong hand, or Einei Hashem El Yireyav, or the eyes of God are towards those who fear him, or Charon Apo, or the fire of the flaming of his nostrils, etc., etc. And Rav Schwab says that these are all, they are descriptions, but they are metaphorical descriptions. God doesn't have what we would call a hand like ours, a corporeal hand, or eyes, or arm, or nostrils. Parenthetically, I will say that my late brother, Aaron Yosef Zichron Livracha, was very fond of quoting the Maharal, who said, it's not that our hand is a mushal for God's hand, our eyes. When we refer to eyes, that it's a mushal for how God can see. But rather, the real hand is God's, something that can manipulate very finely. The real arm, the source of power, is God's. The real eyes, the ability to see everything, Einav Mishotatos Bakol, his eyes take in everything that happens, is God's. Our hands, our arms, our eyes are the muscle. They are the metaphor. Our bodies are a metaphor for, and the powers of our senses and our limbs are a metaphor for the true power, which is that of God. So that's parenthetical here. But in its essence, what Rav Schwab is saying is that the whole point of the Torah's using these terms is l'saber es ha'ozen. It's in order to make the concepts capable of being easily assimilated by us and our experience, because our experience is linked inextricably to our body. So if we can explain something in terms that we're familiar with, then we can begin to have a little bit of a grasp of what we're talking about when it comes to God. But if someone accepts the metaphor as reality and not just takes the lesson and discards the metaphor, but actually ascribes a physicality to God, then he is assimilating, he's withholding, he's holding onto that which he should be discarded. This notion that God has a physical hand, a physical eye, a physical presence is contrary to our fundamental beliefs. And it leads to Avodah Zarah. It leads to a foreign worship, a worship of Kochavim umazalos. There are those who say that the stars, that's the stars and the constellations. There are those who say that the stars are God's eyes, and they worship the eyes of God. And we understand that this is all a metaphor. But people who don't take it as a metaphor and hold on to the muscle, they hold on to the metaphor as though that were indeed the reality, they're holding on to waste. And that's what Avodah Zarah is. Holding on to the waste and treating it as though it had the status of something good and something nutritious. The Ephod was tied in the back, one might say around the back side, to compensate or to atone for the sin of Avodah Zarah, which is taking that which is supposed to be discarded and treating it as though it's actually worthwhile. This principle is applicable not just to Avodah Zarah. It's applicable to all matters in which we accept the mashal without digging deeper. Chazal use mishalim all the time. The Medrash is filled with mishalim of symbolic and representative concepts and language and stories, etc. And if all we do is grasp onto the story and don't dig deeper, we're not serving Avodah Zarah, but we are inappropriately holding on to that which should take a second position and not giving room for the voice of the rabbis for what they really mean. Have a good Shabbos.